The destiny of money is to be encrypted. Now we found something new. We've created this man-made institution or this man-made money in Bitcoin that no man can corrupt. No man can bend. It's rules that we ourselves cannot break. If I can sit down to the game of Monopoly and I can make the rules, you're going to lose every single time. 100% of the time you will lose. That's exactly what the central bank is. It is the rule maker.
So what is Bitcoin? How do you tell that to people? How do you tell your grandma? How do you tell people on the streets? They're gonna look at you like you're a crazy man and that this thing could actually change consciousness, sovereignty.
It is simply an insurance policy on central banking or fiat currency. And the more dollars that central banks produce, the more valuable that policy becomes. With Bitcoin, we have the first fixed supply asset in human history, and that it has a fixed, auditable, unchangeable supply of 21 million. It's almost like we've created a living money, right? This money adapts to our action. When we try to mine more of it, it becomes harder to mine. If we try to mine less of it, it becomes easier to mine.
Freedom means I can ingest something, I can think something, and I can have my own money and not have someone take it away from me, tax it, inflate it.
Productivity creates wealth. Taxation reduces productivity. Inflation is taxation. Bitcoin is the only money in human history with a 0% terminal inflation rate. So if you are a human and you prefer abundance to poverty, then at some point you will be buying Bitcoin.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs, sharing our vulnerability, overcoming our fears, transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Robert Breedlove, the philosopher, writer, freedom maximalist, and Bitcoin-focused entrepreneur. You are the founder and CEO of Parallax Digital, a crypto asset consultancy firm, and host of the What is Money podcast, where you hold conversations with some of the deepest thinkers in the digital world. You've described Bitcoin as a, quote, humanitarian movement exposing the greatest con in human history, that of central banking. You believe that by learning about the connection between honest money, entrepreneurship, and civilization, we are renewing hope for the future of humanity. And you believe Bitcoin is the greatest tool for human freedom ever created, and predicted that by 2031, it could be worth $12.5 million a coin. Robert, welcome to London Real.
Brian, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you here. I'm super excited to go deep here and maybe zoom out a little bit, because for the past 6 months, we've just gone really heavy into crypto assets and DeFi, and we've kind of gone in maybe into the details. We've had Michael Saylor here talking about his kind of paradigm shift or parallax shift. Jeff Booth was here last week, kind of blowing my mind on inflation, deflation. I know you're a fan. Raoul Paul, we've gone into protocols. I've had like the founder of AVAX was here this week, and I think it's worth zooming out. And so that's why I'm glad you're here today. It's a question I ask my students in the DeFi Academy all the time. I say, what is your relationship with money? And we've always at London Real been kind of looking into this unspoken phenomenon that is money. We've had Robert Kiyosaki on here multiple times, and he said to me in the studio, he said, Brian, poor people work for money, rich people make money work for them. And strangely enough, if you look at our 1,000 episodes over 10 years, Robert, a chunk of them are trying to understand what money is. And they're some of my most popular episodes. And yet I feel like we've always been looking at it maybe through the wrong lens, which is right. It's great to have you here. Also, we've always been questioning paradigms, whether it's talking to Jordan Peterson in the studio or talking about psychedelics or going through human movement to like question what's going on in our brains. So I think it's perfect that you're here today. I spent a lot of time with Dennis McKenna and his brother Terrence McKenna, who used to live in Hawaii like you. I think he once said, I don't know who discovered water, but it certainly wasn't a fish. And I feel like sometimes we're so stuck in this, paradigm of money that we don't even know what it is sometimes. And that's why it's great you're here today. So I want to jump into this. I figured we might want to do this in kind of three parts. Maybe first talk about what is money, then maybe what is Bitcoin and what is the future. You got some deep questions on this and our thoughts on this. Before we get started, something hit me the other night and I had to tell you. I know you've got young children, and I do as well. And I was reading a story to my two boys the other night. They're 4 and 5 years old, and they love pirate stories. All right, so there's the pirate, there's the ship, there's the gold. There's always some conflict. And my son Caden said to me this, Robert, and I think you might like this. He said, "Papa, why does the pirate have a treasure map?" And I just stopped and I thought, why does he have a treasure map? And after a minute, I thought, well, because he doesn't have Bitcoin. And it was just, it's this weird thing. Because why does he? Well, because the value that he really wants, he can't carry with him. He's got to hide it. He can't have fiat currency. Anyways, there's a lot of things to unpack there. But I thought it was a good question. And maybe this episode will answer that question for him, maybe 10 years when he watches it. So anyways, great to have you here. Curious on those thoughts. And I'm probably going to start with the greatest question that I think you like being asked, which is, what is money? And what do you think about some of those thoughts I just mentioned?
That's great. I like to hear that your son is already thinking deeply about this topic. That tells me he will not be disillusioned by the world around him as he grows up. That question, the reason I named the show that question is because kind of twofold. One, there are many answers to the question, what is money? It is not as simple as it may seem. And two, I guess I'm making kind of an attempt at Inception in a way. If you've ever seen that movie where they plant the idea, I'm trying to just plant this seed in the minds of people. It's like, just ask yourself this question. If I could just get people to walk away with this inquisitive nature about money, I think that is a gateway into this rabbit hole that then unlocks a lot of other important questions, like what is value, what is government, what is society, et cetera. So one of the answers I'll give, which I think you've already alluded to well, is money is the economic water in which we all swim. There's this great commencement speech by, I think it's, I forget the name of the guy, but he's talking about this this is water speech, where he says there's a young fish swimming by an old fish one day, and the old fish says to the young fish, "Hey guys, how's the water?" And the young fish kind of looks at him funny, and they swim on by, and then one young fish says to the other, he goes, "What the hell is water?" It's something that we think through more often than we think about. So this is the psychotechnological aspect of money. So just like literacy and numeracy are part of our cognitive software, money too is very much embedded in our mental architecture. It's a little bit interesting though, because literacy and numeracy, clearly these are just psychological tools that we're using, but money is kind of a hybrid, right? Money, it has a psychological aspect to it, but it also has to have rooting into the real world, right? There has to be some thermodynamic bridge, something to substantiate money. It's not purely a mental construct that we can just arbitrarily toy with, despite central bankers' best wishes and efforts. Another way to think about money is that it is a contract with the future, actually. So, and this gets into the aspects of money as kind of a marketplace emblem for time itself, for human time. So clearly, we all tacitly know this. We go into work, or we start a business, or we engage in some entrepreneurial effort, sacrificing our time, our energy, our effort to obtain money, right? So we're trading basically labor for money. And then if we have rendered value to the market, or we've provided favors to the marketplace that it finds valuable, we can then take that money and redeem it for similar sacrifices from others, right? You can go to the restaurant and order your food, or buy your car, or whatever. So in this big global macroeconomic game, we're basically trading favors with one another. And money becomes this social contract with the future that I can reliably go out and exchange my time, effort, and energy for this token that will hold that value across time such that I can redeem it from others in the future. So there's a couple of answers there. And then, I would like to speak to the treasure map too, that the pirate with the treasure map, I think this points towards the destiny of money, actually. Money it has to be encrypted somehow. Even gold historically, right? The reason gold became money, and there's a long history there, but one of the main reasons is that the alchemists weren't successful. We could not figure out how to create gold from lead or anything else. So the supply of gold was rigid. No matter how much time, effort, energy we poured into it, it was the commodity whose supply increased the most slowly and predictably, which made gold the ultimate store of value historically, for a number of other reasons as well, but we'll just focus on the supply aspect. That meant that gold's formula effectively was encrypted, right? By chemistry or physics or whatever way you want to look at it. No one could crack the code on gold. Right. So it is the destiny of money to become encrypted. And that's, leads us straight into the Bitcoin discussion for later.
Yeah, that treasure map thing is deep because, again, you just made a good point. I was thinking, I don't know what the alternative of the fiat currencies would be in the Caribbean at that time anyways. But even if he could get them, they wouldn't be necessarily worth anything, or they could even use them, or he or she, the pirates. Like you said, the gold somehow had a fixed supply, and even he knew that. And I've had this conversation before. My wife's from Bulgaria, and her mother, we call Baba. You look where Baba keeps her money back in the day, and she knows not to keep it in local currency. The smart money goes into gold, or maybe, $1, because it's maybe the next best thing. And so again, the pirate has it. He knows he can't carry it with him. He knows he has to hide it somewhere, and that's also potential, that contract with the future, right? There's a lot of deep questions there.
Yeah, and so that's a great point there, is that, another definition of money, actually, it's intended to be the trust minimized asset. So it's the asset you can hold and store value in that you do not need to trust anyone else. It is the minimal amount of need to trust anyone else, which is to say you have minimal counterparty risk. And to hold physical gold, you knew no one in the world could counterfeit your supply. No one could expand the supply and dilute you. And if you self-custody, right, as the pirate was doing, or maybe as Baba was doing if they buried it in their backyard, you did trust a custodian, because not only is it foolish to store your wealth in fiat currency where the issuer can just debase you, right? They can just print money and dilute you. But if you stored your physical gold with a custodian, that's equally dangerous, right? They'll raid your safety deposit box, or anytime the geopolitical situation gets too dicey, you could just lose your gold. So it's been the destiny of money to be something that is encrypted either by a treasure map or by a chemistry formula related to gold, or both. And it's been the destiny of money to be something that the individual can hold, right? That I can hold and possess and not need to trust anyone else. That maximizes my individual sovereignty and economic agency in the world.
And you've also, called money our most brilliant idea. And if we go from like hunter-gatherer tribe and we try to zoom into maybe a century ago, I mean, when we're hunter and gatherers, we didn't need it, but soon it became, like you said, this water, this incredible way to kind of quantify value. But then, and I've heard you talk about this before, and you maybe talk about it now, when we stopped moving around, we became agrarian, it then became an asset. And then you go on to say, as humans, we always want more of something. And that's when things really started changing. And I wonder if you could talk about that concept, because I don't think a lot of people have really thought about some of those ideas.
Yeah, this is a great origin story, actually. So to your point, we're hunters and gatherers for a long, long time, right? So just nomadic people moving around, eating whatever we can kill. The assets we had then were mostly just tools, right? Mostly just bearer assets, the things we could carry. But eventually, and the reasons why are a little bit debated, but I like the one theory that we settled down and became agrarian so we could start growing wheat to make beer. Like we think it was to grow food, but there's a lot of thoughts out there that we actually, and we figured out we could also eat the grain, et cetera, et cetera. Once we settled down and became agricultural, for the first time in human history, we started to create a real economic surplus, right? We're growing more than we can eat. So all of a sudden we need to store this food somewhere. We also started producing these agricultural assets, right? Plows and buildings and, all the tools necessary to grow the food. So this was the genesis of capital, really, beyond just bearer assets like your dagger and whatever. So this, not only did government emerge at this time, because now we had assets that we needed to protect, right? So we needed a protection producing enterprise, such that plunderers did not take this economic surplus. But it also, as economic surpluses emerged, they emerged in more places than one. So these centers of agricultural activity became centers of economic activity, right? One group would grow one form of plant, one group would grow another. They would trade. And this is how we sort of organically discovered what economists call the division of labor. And the easy way to think about this is, there's the old adage, many hands make light work. So like if you can do something that you're really good at and I can do something that I'm really good at, and we can trade, then we are both better off effectively. But again, that trade, there has to be some intermediary, right? Otherwise we're kind of stuck needing to match our wants exactly, right? You need to have the exact amount of bushels of whatever, and I have the exact amount. So money emerges through this process of trade as quite simply the most liquid asset, or the most tradable asset. So, and maybe an easy way to think about this is once people recognize that something is widely accepted in trade, right? Say it's, for a long time it was salt, for instance. Then all of a sudden, I don't need to necessarily demand salt for consumption, right? If I'm trying to trade my farming tool for your fishing rod, I may very likely trade it into salt, just knowing that you're going to accept salt in trade, right? So salt sort of becomes, if you think about the trading in the world is kind of this set of concentric spheres, and the topmost sphere is the most tradable asset. Once that recognition sets in with everyone, everyone's trying to trade for the most tradable asset, because then that gives you pure optionality, right? I can take that asset and get anything I want, no matter what want I have to satisfy. I know that I could swap salt if salt is money for that thing. So this is very important, because what are entrepreneurs doing, right? What is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is a prophet, effectively, that is mapping his current action to anticipated future market data in pursuit of profits. So the word profit and profit are very, very closely connected here. To deal with the uncertainty that an entrepreneur faces, what is the ideal solution to uncertainty? The answer is options. You want as many options as possible. And this gets us to another definition of money, which is an instrument of pure optionality in the marketplace. It can literally be redeemed for any good or service that any market actor can produce. So I think I like that origin story about the agricultural age, because it points not only to the emergence of the state, but also to the emergence of money more generally.
And it also introduces a strange component. I forgot, there was this movie when I was a kid where it was this really popular movie around the States where it was kind of a comedy, but it charted this tribe in Africa that had a Coke bottle dropped in. And once the Coke bottle dropped in, it was a scarce asset and they used it, and then people saw it and they became greedy, and it changed the whole social structure. And so you kind of implied that once we got agriculture and once we got assets, then humans wanted more. And then in that pursuit of wanting more, we start getting into the issue with central banking and inflation, et cetera. Maybe you can explain that link a little bit better, because you have that same thesis that as humans, We always want more. We always want something that we don't, what is it?
Nothing.
For nothing, right? That's an important core thesis of everything you're saying, because a lot of people either don't want to agree with that or don't want to think about that. But that is part of the root of the problem of what we're even talking about here, right?
Yes. Well, it's the thing that's kind of paradoxical or maybe ambivalent, you might say, is that, and there's a whole deep metaphysical conversation here, but I want, where should we start? The universe is kind of something for nothing, right? We don't really know. Maybe the Big Bang is not the right model, but all of this came from basically nothing, according to a lot of modern physics. So, the galaxy, actually, all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy and many billions of other galaxies throughout the universe, they are storms of stars revolving around a black hole. We've identified a black hole at the heart of almost every galaxy. So there's something revolving around, nothing, the ultimate nothing. And in man, the heart of man is never satisfied. So there's this black hole in all of our hearts, effectively, that's driving us to pursue something for nothing, right? We always want more, frankly. And it's ambivalent because it's driving the entrepreneur, right? The entrepreneur is trying to brilliantly, elegantly, but sort of lazily solve problems, right? I just want to create a tool that will let me leverage my efforts, right? Let me accomplish greater aims with less effort. That's it. That's the other pursuit of the entrepreneur. So to get something for nothing through innovation or trade, right? That's a pursuit. But if you cross this kind of moral line, you can also get something for nothing by stealing or being violent or aggressive. So it's this ambivalent black hole in the heart of man, I think, that drives economic activity in the world. And to get back to, I'll branch this into central bank, and this is very broad strokes because we're covering a lot of human history briefly. But so in this pursuit of something for nothing, we're trading, we're innovating, something emerges as the most tradable asset in different economic networks across the world. But as these economic networks start to interconnect themselves, especially in like 18th, 19th century, when we start to develop telecommunications, the world starts to become kind of one big mind, effectively. And so market actors, through their voluntary action, are pursuing a form of money that best provides 5 services. And this is, you can think about this as the properties of money or just the services that market actors seek in money itself. And this is an important point too, that will help us with Bitcoin later. People often get really hung up on physical goods. Like, what is this physical good? But a better way to think about the economy is that all market actors are seeking are services, ultimately, right? I don't care about the physical Tesla. I care about how fast it can move me. I care about what form of status representation it gives me. There are services that car are rendering to me. That's what I'm actually demanding. It has nothing to do with the physical object itself. Right. Now, oftentimes those services need certain physical features, but it's the services ultimately that matter. So that's an important point to remember. In money, we're seeking a tool that provides us 5 critical services or properties. It's divisibility, durability, recognizability, portability, scarcity. We can go into detail on that after if you like, but essentially monetary metals best satisfied those 5 properties, right? As a tool, they were the most divisible, durable, recognizable, portable tool available historically. Of the monetary metals, gold was the most scarce, which is to say that, as we said earlier, its supply was the most predictable. It was the hardest supply to change. Therefore, it was the most inflation resistant money. Therefore, it's the best store of value in the world, right? And we all know that, right? Everyone knows gold is a great store of value. It's valuable. Very few of us, it's a tool that's so old, I like to joke that we forgot why it's valuable. Everyone knows gold's valuable. Very few people know the properties of money. One other little nuance here I'll insert that's important is people typically think of scarcity as purely a supply side phenomenon, but scarcity actually occurs when demand exceeds supply. So you can have something that's extremely valuable, but non-scarce. And if it's not scarce, it's not going to have a market price. Oxygen is a great example here. Clearly, oxygen, very valuable to life, but it's so abundant that there's no market price for it yet. Hopefully there's not. So gold was the best monetary technology we had historically, but it had one critical shortcoming. This is a technological limitation that introduced an attack vector for central banks to exploit. And that is that gold is physical, it's heavy, it's expensive to secure, it can be violently confiscated. So to economize the use of gold and to scale it as a monetary technology, we started putting gold in warehouses. And the warehouse would issue a warehouse receipt, whereas each receipt was redeemable for 1 ounce of gold on deposit. Market actors all of a sudden figured out, okay, this is a much cheaper way to transact in something that's as good as gold. So in that one property of money that gold really lacked, which was portability, currency positively augmented the portability of gold such that it made it globally transactable. And this was escalated even further when we later abstracted currency into electronic form. So those custodians or those warehouses ultimately became banks. And again, just due to the economies of scale, right? The more you can centralize gold, the less fixed cost you have related to its abstraction into currency, the more efficient and cost effective it is to use gold as money. So this was great. This allowed us to have all of the desired services of money, properties were now gathered into a single technology, which was gold-backed currency. Wonderful.
Right.
What's the problem? Money needs to be trust minimized, right? We're looking for the trust minimized asset of exchange. What have we just done by abstracting gold into a currency? We've introduced the need to trust the issuer or the warehouse. We now have to trust these guys that hold the keys to the castle or the keys to the gold, so to speak, not to print more money than their gold reserves can justify, not to commit a contractual fraud with their customers, because that's what each paper certificate represented. Each banknote was redeemable for a certain unit of gold. If they issue those banknotes in excess of their reserves, it is a contractual fraud with their customers. Well, turns out the monopolists on violence, the state and the government, quickly figured out, as a means of getting something for nothing, all they had to do was target these centralized custodians of gold. And this basically served as a near limitless revenue source for government, right? If I can just break into or monopolize, it's not like a physical break in and shakedown. Typically, they just allow banks to suspend redemption of gold, right? Where the customers can't get the gold out. And then the government will take over the issuance of the currency. It will become a sovereign currency. Then they'll print way more promises to gold than they actually have gold. And they'll defend that asymmetric privilege with force, violence, coercion, compulsion, and the like. And that's really what gets us into the age of central banking. The most recent example of this was post-World War II. The United States enters the theater of war late, declares itself victorious, holds the Bretton Woods Conference, says gold, the dollar will be pegged to gold. Every other international currency will be pegged to the dollar. Countries accept this largely because they don't really have a choice. The US holds the most gold. They have the dominant military force in the world. And they also accept it because there's this pretense of being able to redeem their currency for dollars and in turn for gold. So they could call bluff of the US if they were irresponsible with monetary policy. Well, this goes on for about 30 years, and countries start calling the United States bluff as it prints more currency than it can justify with its gold reserves. And around 1970, Germany tries to repatriate some gold. And that's when we have the infamous 1971 Nixon shock, where he temporarily, quote unquote, suspends redeemability for gold, and we go onto this fiat currency standard. And 50 years later, here we are, globally still on this temporary fiat currency measure.
And so these are some big dates for people to kind of understand where people were just taking a little bit more liberties, and this set us up. And like you said, I think it was 70 and 71. I think England wanted some of their gold back as well. And so, yeah, the president made a decision with the Fed to, I guess, like you said, do a temporary taking the dollar off the gold standard. And then, of course, last year and this year we print, a record amount of dollars, and we're even much further deeper than we ever expected to be a few years ago. Now, ultimately, though, you think this is also the common fatality of any type of a central banking institution, because ultimately the citizens demand more, maybe something for nothing, and this cycle repeats over 100-year periods. This is something that I talked to Jeff Booth about, this concept just of inflation and deflation. And whether you point the finger at someone doing it bad, this is a cycle that repeats, that even the rich lose at over a 100-year cycle. Usually it's the poor that take the initial hits with inflation, but then the rich take a hit when everything is confiscated by the governments or wars or that kind of thing. Can you just speak on your thoughts on that? As in, is this inevitable when we lock ourselves into money, as we used to know it, at least?
Yeah, so I think that, first of all, there's this old saying that there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government solution. So that's how we got into fiat currency, right? It's self-deception, I think. This is not, I don't like to paint this as some type of cabal behind the curtain that's planning in, detail how they're just going to victimize society forever. It's incremental, right? There's this gradualism to it where if you just follow the incentives, right? A government owns the monopoly on force and violence, so they can basically do whatever they want in the physical domain. The most important tool and the most important incentive schema for human beings is money. So in the interest of getting maximal leverage or maximum something for nothing, government can then apply that monopoly on force to control this instrument that is human time, frankly, right? Money is human time. They're indistinguishable, right? Money emblematizes human time in the marketplace, as we described earlier. So now, instead of trying to go door to door and physically coerce people to do what you want, you can just control this concentrated source of power and human time and apply your willpower, imprint your willpower onto the world, your political power onto the world. So humans in position of power, let's say policymakers, they've always managed to convince themselves, they've managed to rationalize, we just need to take a little bit of this, monopolize the money just a little bit, or just print a little bit more money to accomplish aims A, B, and C. And again, nothing is more permanent than a temporary government solution, right? Every time they add these bureaucratic layers, which they've funded through the theft of monetary manipulation, right? Whether it's inflation or it could be direct taxation as well. They're basically adding layers to this bureaucratic beast that it doesn't ever suffer any Darwinian correction. There's no creative destruction in the government until a government is absolutely destroyed, right? Either in war or overthrown by revolution. So you end up with this coercive element at the heart of every economy, which is antithetical to what an economy is meant to be, right? We create value only through voluntary exchange. When you and I enter into a trade, the only reason we trade is because you think what I have is more valuable to you, and I think the same. I think what you have is more valuable to me. So when we exchange, at least psychologically, we are both better off after the trade. If you remove, this is called the inequality of exchange, is what economists call this. So it might be intuitive to think that we're trading things that are equal in value, but that's not at all what's happening. It's you have to think what I have is more valuable and vice versa. When you break the mechanism of voluntary exchange, you destroy value creation. So when you engage in involuntary exchange, which is to say theft, coercion, compulsion, violence, you are destroying value. And that, I think, is the fundamental problem, is that humans in position of power have managed to rationalize coercion, compulsion, and violence as some temporary solution to some temporary problem. And they're just accumulating these long run risk over time and diverging. The other thing here is that the structure we inhabit, then it becomes divergent from the collective wishes of market actors, right? It's not what they would have voted for. So you've got like more and more theft accumulating in this system of voluntary action. And when they diverge significantly enough, there has to be a reckoning, right? The reckoning comes as warfare or it comes as revolution. So I think, again, the destiny of money is to be encrypted. And I think gold historically is kind of the analog. Like the reason humans chose gold is because it was the thing humans could not pollute with their opinion or political willpower. They could, no matter how much we tried to imprint our political will on gold, we couldn't change it. Right. So gold became the base layer operating system, or the prime mover for human action, if you will. And now we found something new. We've created this man-made institution, or this man-made money in Bitcoin, that no man can corrupt. No man can bend. It's rules that we ourselves cannot break. So we need fair and immutable rules as the bedrock of peaceful cooperation. Because if we can twist the rules, that is the best strategy. To be able to be the rule maker is to be able to win in perpetuity. Right. Obviously, right? If I can sit down to the game of Monopoly and I can make the rules, you're going to lose every single time. 100% of the time you will lose. That's exactly what the central bank is. It is the rule maker. This gets back to the old Rothschild quote, "Give me the ability to issue a nation's currency and I care not who makes its laws."
And so before we jump into Bitcoin, can you talk about then this concept of inflation when we're looking forward into what technically should be a deflationary world? And this is something that Jeff Booth talked a lot about. When you pull out your mobile phone, you see the price of everything going to zero. And yet when you look out into the world, the price of everything is going up. And so maybe we just finish with inflation before we jump into the phenomenon of Bitcoin and what it means and how maybe it is the only thing that can keep us honest as humans. What are your thoughts on how do you explain inflation to people? Because most people don't get it. I mean, here in the UK, the government sent out furlough checks and everybody was celebrating that fact. And I just wanted to say, this is going to hurt you the worst. The people getting those checks, you're going to pay for this 10, 20, 30 times over in that inflationary cost. But nobody wants to hear that. And as Jeff said, it's those people that are in such a crisis mode that they can't even process that because it's not enough money to even live. So how do you actually explain inflation to people?
First of all, I'd like to say you're absolutely right. Those people that are most excited about those checks are the ones that are being victimized the most, right? Yeah. Because, and by definition, because the reason they're the most excited to get a check for pounds or dollars or whatever is because they depend on that dollar or pound being valuable in the marketplace, right? The more excited you are about getting a check from the government, clearly the higher proportion cash is of your net worth, which means you are being victimized the most through inflation. When they're producing more of they're diluting the thing that you depend on to store value across time. But it's a kind of brilliant deception in a way. So I'll throw out some quick numbers here in the US, and you may have to check me on them because they're a little bit dated, but it came out to roughly $46,000 per US household. The post-COVID monetary expansion, right? Wow. So they printed roughly $46,000 per 130 million US households, I think is roughly the number. The check comes out and it's around $3,500 per US household. So what's the delta, right? $46,000 per US household produced, around, call it 4,000 sent to each US household. Where's this $42,000 shortfall? Well, of course, it's doled out, at the whim of politicians, let's say. And that is the percentage of dilution that will ultimately roll downhill to those depending on the fiat currency to store value over time. So you're absolutely right. It's those that are most excited are most victimized. To speak to inflation and deflation, we are trading, innovating to become better, right? To become better at producing things with less effort, to become more productive, which is to say to become more wealthy. These things are actually indistinguishable, right? All of the reason we enjoy all these modern miracles of the marketplace is because we have deeply divided labor, right? Again, many hands make light work. When you have 8 billion people coordinating themselves through money in a global symphony of supply chains, all of a sudden we get a lot of innovation, right? Like how you and I are now talking how from around the world through a telecommunication device, like that's a miracle. This is magical. This magic comes from the marketplace. It comes from the division of labor. And it becomes more affordable over time because we have competition, free market competition. So producers are competing with one another to satisfy the wants the marketplace demands at a lower and lower price at a higher and higher quality. Competition, economic competition in this way is discovery process, right? And that is what creates high quality of life and abundance in the world. So in a normal market economy where money is holding its value over time, right? Like on a gold standard, for instance, we should expect that on average, the prices of goods and services would decline as we become better and smarter at making things. You see this in the world of software and hardware, right? Over the past 10 or 20 years, because it's a newer industry, largely independent of the state. The state has not been able to print faster than we've been able to get better at making technology, frankly. So you've seen a lot of price deflation, right? Prices have declined. Your big screen TV that used to cost $30,000 is now $2,000, whatever. But when other market spaces are not innovating as quickly, right? And you could look at something like, I like the example of a ribeye steak. There's not really a lot of innovation we're going to be able to come up with to make that cow eat its grass faster, grow faster, go through the process, get the steak to the grocery store. You're not going to deflate ribeye steak. Like it's an energy intensive product. So you can't really deflate it much more. When central banks start to increase currency supplies, you end up with more and more dollars, which are just call options on this stuff, the goods and services. The things that are very energy intensive, like a ribeye steak, we can't technologically innovate that process much more. That's going to go up in price a lot. You know, your Netflix subscription and, you know, your big screen TV may be coming down in price, but energy intensive items go up. And so we've normalized, and I would argue a lot of this has to do with the corruption of money leading to the corruption of academia, that we've normalized the concept of inflation, that we've been sold this false bill of goods that tells us it's necessary for a healthy economy, and it's deceptive enough to work. Right. Because if you own a house, it goes up in price nominally. If you own stocks, they're increasing in price nominally. And we're thinking through dollars, but not stopping to think about dollars, right? We're just thinking if the dollar value goes up, then everything's good. I have more dollars than I had before. My broker statement says I have more dollars than I had last year. Everything's great. Right. But what you're not perceiving is that unit of economic perception that we call the dollar is being diminished, right? So you're losing purchasing power, is what economists would say.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.